Hello everyone, my name is Rohit Tandia, and today I'm going to talk about privatization of PSUs. And before that, I owe you an apology for not being there as we planned. Actually, मैं कल रात को 4 बजे सोया था, तो उसकी वजह से मेरी आँख नहीं खुल पाई आज. And of course, that's my fault, so I'm sorry for that. I will try not to repeat this. Thank you. We have heard a lot of news about privatization in last few years. And recently the government privatized Air India, and it finally went to Tata's after a very long time, because the first proposal came in 2002. Yes, almost 20 years back, and it took 2 decades to privatize a loss-making enterprise. And hopefully Tata's will treat it well. And the government recently sold 3.4% stake of LIC in open markets. Just 3.4%. So we should start from the very beginning, from the year 1950s, the year when Planning Commission was formed. It was decided that we will go with a mixed economy, a mixed structure of capitalism and socialism. But in reality it was more about socialism, and probably it was necessary after 200 years of British rule. Things went on like this for next 4 decades. During the year 1965 to 1985, we nationalized several private players. And some of the PSU giants today used to be private players like Indian Oil, HPCL and BPCL. But today they are doing quite well with heavy revenues and turnovers. Things did go well for next 20 years, but after that we started to realize that these PSUs are not performing well and we need to do something about it. And some of the reasons behind the poor performance were outdated technology, and delay in the introduction of new techniques and machinery, and overemployment, and also lack of competition and poor project management and debt equity ratio. The year 1991 came and India's economy was crumbling. We were doing really poorly and we were left with no other option except going to IMF. So we went to IMF, and IMF asked us to change our fundamentals of our economic structure. So we introduced LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization and globalization. And that's how the phase of privatization actually started in the year 1991. But government was reluctant to privatize its PSUs. For next few years, privatization went on a very slow speed. Government privatized almost 40 PSUs, not privatized. They termed it as disinvestment. They sold on average 8.8% stake in 40 PSUs, just 8.8%, only minority stake and no control to any private players. The year 1999 came and there was new government, NDA government, and they started the privatization. In reality, they sold more than 12 PSUs, and 10 went to private players and 2 went to PSUs in cross-sale transactions. They also sold 20 hotels in slum sale, and they put a target of 60,000 crore of disinvestment, but they could only achieve a figure of 24,600 crore, but which was very huge for that time because it was done for the first time. Then in 2004, new UPA government came and they changed their disinvestment policies drastically, and the privatization slowed down. They had a target of 1,93,000 crore and they could achieve a figure of 1,14,000 crore, which was actually almost 5 times in the previous government. But they made some changes. They decided they will not sell any profit-making PSUs and only the loss-making ones. And then the year 2014 came, and it was time for NDA 2, and everyone was expecting big changes and a lot of privatization and disinvestment. But that did not happen too quickly. The government came up with their disinvestment policies in 2016, almost 2 years later, and they changed the name of Department of Disinvestment to Department of Investment and Public Asset Management. And they had 2 core goals: efficient management of public units and promoting public investment. But at the same time, they expanded the horizon of disinvestment. NDA 2 government put a target of 4,27,000 crore and they could achieve a figure of 3,65,000 crore, which was much bigger than any previous government. But if we look at all the transactions, 78% were minority stakes, and only in 22% stake times they actually gave the control to private players. So even under the NDA too, privatization was not that drastic. They most of the time sold only a minority stake, and that's very important. We have seen a lot of disinvestment and privatization in last few years because the government is doing it quite rapidly compared to previous governments, and we need to talk about impact of this privatization and especially the role of PSUs in Indian economy. The clear advantages of privatization are that the government can get rid of loss-making PSUs, and after they are operated by the private players, it's quite possible they will start making profits and they will be more efficient. The privatization makes sure there is fair competition in the market and equal footing for private players. There is more variety, more choices, and better quality for the end consumers. And there is also creation of wealth, which was not the case in first 40 years because the creation of wealth was quite slow. And for a country of 140 crore people, we need funds and wealth to run these social service schemes. And also, it's a given thing that when there is increase in the upper middle class population of the country, they want much better services, and they are able to pay for them. For example, if we talk about the railways, there are so many people in India who would want much better services, trains on time, and they will pay higher fares. The privatization of PSUs and its impact on Indian economy, and not just Indian economy but also on other aspects. Snapdeal, Ola, Oyo, Zomato, Swiggy, Big Basket, Flipkart, Paytm, PhonePe are some of the apps and brands and platforms which we use in our daily life. But all of them have something in common. All of them have Chinese fundings. Yes, all of them. And God knows how the data is shared with the Chinese. And these are the apps and platforms used by 25% Indians. And that's a big number. Now we need to talk about China and India. And they are already the biggest rivals in Asia. And in future things are going to get really serious. And we need to prepare ourselves. And that will not be the war strategies. It will be about economy, because in last 500 years we have seen war only cause destruction and heavy financial and economic losses. And last 500 years have been dominated by the economic policies and economic powers. And China is exactly doing that. We need to talk about the PSUs of China. In USA, there is a company called Fortune 500, and every year they release a list of the strongest and most profitable, biggest global companies. And until 2019, USA used to be the first country with the most Fortune 500 companies. But in 2022, something strange happened. China was on the first position with most Fortune 500 companies, 124 Fortune 500 companies. And the strangest thing about this, 95% of these Chinese companies were state-owned. Chinese state-owned companies. And they were almost 1/5 of those 500 companies. And that's a strange phenomena. The way Chinese treat and use their PSUs is totally opposite from what India is doing right now. China is a country with almost 1.4 billion people, and that's the same with India. We are also almost 1.4 billion people. We have so many people and so many problems: poverty, hunger, and unemployment. The private players' first priority is only and only profitability, but that's not the case with these government companies. They run and make their policies in sync with the government motives, and they also look for the public and their benefits. The way the Chinese are treating their PSUs is quite different from India. India, Brazil, Mexico combined had only 17 companies in this Fortune 500 list, and that's around 3.4%. And when we compare it to China, it's nothing. India seriously need to consider the way it's treating its PSUs. The government, as per some reports, is planning to privatize ONGC, Shipping Corporation of India, and Bharat Petroleum. And these are not just the PSUs with heavy net worth and profits, but they are also strategically very vital and important strategic assets for India. For example, Bharat Petroleum have oil reserves in more than 17 countries. Same goes with ONGC. And if we privatize these PSUs, Chinese will be the first one who will try to grab a pie in these PSUs via their shell companies or big private bankers. And if that happens, that will be a big blow for our national integrity and India's sovereignty. Because if Chinese have such an important role in Indian giants, they will manipulate India's economy and pose greater threats. If we look at last 500 years, the war has been really expensive and that has not gained much. The actual strategic power has been the economic policies and the economic powers. If we look at British, French and the Portuguese, they did not win so many countries by the wars, but actually by their economic policies. And China is already doing that. Chinese have investment and assets worth 3.7 trillion in Europe and USA via their state-owned Chinese companies. And India's economic size is 3 trillion. 3 trillion. And they have 3.7 trillion in USA and Europe alone. We need to think what we are doing with our PSUs and make sure we secure our national interest. I will give you a shocking fact. Until 1989, 40% of India's maritime trade was used to be done on Indian ships. Now, in 2022, only 6%. And rest of the business went to Chinese ships. Think about this. 94% of India's maritime trade is not done on Indian ships. And that can be a big blow for India in future.